Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our second of the Healthy Yards webinar series. My name is Emily Green. I am our Director of Member Engagement and Events with Save the Sound. And for those who don't know about Save the Sound, I hope you do since you're joining us, but a little bit about Save the Sound. I'm not on my screen. There we go. So for over 40 years, Save the Sound has led environmental action in the Long Island Sound region. We fight climate change, save endangered lands, protect the Sound and its rivers, and work with nature to restore ecosystems. We work across the entire Long Island Sound region. We have this lovely impact map to show how expansive our work is. And actually, we have an interactive impact map now on our website where you can really dive into each one of these items on this map and discover some of what we do in the region. We work, from Plum Island off the North Fork of Long Island to the Bronx, up through Westchester County, through Connecticut, all the way to both Rhode Island and Massachusetts borders. And there's so much to learn on our impact map online, and I will share that link shortly. And this is just a brief snapshot of the work we do. And to dive into more, you can go to our website again in the What We Do section. As you can see, we work in many ways. You can see that in the impact map, but here we dive in a little bit more. We protect clean water, restoring regional ecosystems through hands-on science and community collaboration, legislative advocacy, and legal action. And our expert legal team we have on staff continues to have a winning record in preserving our region's threatened forests, islands, and riverfronts. Then we also have our hands-on regional habitat restoration, and we're creating lasting physical change that strengthens natural systems and benefits wildlife and people. And lastly, we're leading on bold climate action through policy leadership and on-the-ground projects that help our neighborhoods and ecosystems adapt to escalating climate threats. Oops. And these are just a few current projects we're working on. There's a lot more than this. Again, visit our website. We have a lot more information on it. But just a little bit here, we've got an ecological restoration project in Wilton called Merwin Meadows. It's a dam removal project along the Norwalk River. And it would be the final barrier to opening up all 23 miles of the river. Then we have the Transportation and Climate Initiative in the state of Connecticut that we have been moving forward with to ensure that we maximize the opportunity to invest in electric vehicles, public transportation, pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, and other methods of reducing emissions. We've also been working for over a decade to preserve Plum Island, and this past December, we got one step closer to that goal, and Congress took it off the auction block, and now the next step is to find a permanent conservation owner. Finally, about a year ago, a sewer main in New Haven collapsed and leaked 2.1 million gallons of raw sewage into the Mill River. And our legal and water quality team took immediate action, tested the impact on the water, and started an investigation into the cause of the spill, and recently filed a Clean Water Act complaint in federal court against the Greater New Haven Water Pollution Control Authority as a result of those findings. And this past year, we've all found ways to stay engaged and stay connected, and we did that mostly through webinars. We have a lot of different work that we do, so our topics range drastically. Obviously, we have the Healthy Yard series, but we have had anything from creating pollinator pathways to regenerative farming practices to learning more about what our legislative advocacy is doing and climate action with youth leadership. You can always visit our Stay Engaged page to see what's happening and what's coming up. One big thing we have coming up, Paddle for the Sound, is this summer. If you like paddleboarding, kayaking, sailing, walking or running, literally there's something for everyone. So I hope that you will visit our website and get involved. And with that, I am going to stop sharing for now and turn this over to our main presentation. We are going to start by hearing from Suzanne Thompson. Suzanne is our Save Oswegatchie Hills Outreach Coordinator for Save the Sound. And I'm gonna let you share the screen now.
Okay, it's a delight to be here with everyone today. Normally, I would be hiking Oswegatchie Hills, which is in southeastern Connecticut. That's in East Lyme. It's above the Niantic River. As outreach coordinator, I work with the local communities. I am a member of one of the organizations that founded the Save Oswegatchie Hills Coalition. Save the Sound came to our rescue to help and represent us on the legal front, and also help us to build awareness and community support, indeed statewide and regional support, to protect the Oswegatchie Hills. And if you look at this map, you can see you are looking down from a bird's eye view of East Lyme, Connecticut on the left, and Waterford, Connecticut. That's the Long Island Sound to the south. That is the Niantic River. It's a tidal estuary. We call it the bathtub. It's a very short tributary that leads into Long Island Sound. It is tidal, so it goes up and down with the tides. If you look in the middle here, you can see there is an existing Oswegatchie Hills Nature Preserve. That's what's in green, 457 acres. It has been put together over the last 15 to 20 years by ambitious volunteers, the Friends of Oswegatchie Hills Nature Preserve. The orange land that you see is the adjoining northern end of the ridgeline, 236 acres, owned by a developer. And we've been battling in the courts to try to protect that land and to add it to the rest of the preserve. So I invite you to come and hike Oswegatchie Hills when you're not gardening. I am an avid gardener as well. And you can see the beauty in the hills are very important from the standpoint of fresh water, wetlands, undisturbed, pristine forest. That pristine forest, and while being home to wildlife and migrating birds, flows directly down into the Niantic River, that little bathtub of an estuary I mentioned. The hillside that you're looking at is the northern ridge that we're trying to protect. It's directly on the Niantic River. There's no beach there. It's truly a palisade. It's rocks going up. And so it's very important that the soil in that coastal forest, it serves as a giant sponge to catch pollutants coming off of I-95, other roads and areas in development further inland from the Niantic River. So it's all interrelated: the water, the land, the environment, the species. That area you can see is it's a popular kayaking area. It is a low tidal channel, so you really can't get too far up it with something with a propeller. So kayaks and canoes and sups are perfect. It's full of osprey and bald eagles, shellfish, and the menhaden and other fish that feed them. That's one of the reasons that our Save the River, Save the Hills, a little organization, has participated ever since its inception in the Unified Water Study of the Long Island Sound report card of Save the Sound. So we're out on the water every summer, like other volunteers, dipping zons into the water and testing the water quality. We want to see how the condition is, hopefully that it is improving. We'd love to see more shell fishing coming back to the Niantic River. There are clams there. We hope to see more scallops coming back as well. The Oswegatchie Hills are a passive nature preserve. They are full of wildlife. As you can see, some birds having been getting their dinner or their lunch. Again, that wetlands supports all sorts of aquatic species or land species, frogs, salamanders. This is our signature newt here that shows up regularly, all sorts of numbers of them in the forest. There's also a full array of native plants and flowers blooming there. And those are important for pollinators, as well as the birds and wildlife that feed on them and on other insects and species. It's all a food chain. The shadblow is already gone for the season on the left, but the kalmia will be blooming anytime soon now. And there are many other native flowers. It is a forest. It's not a pasture land or a meadow, but you do see some zizias around the perimeter. That's on the left-hand side with the yellow flowers. In the middle, you can see some wood asters. There's a little oak tree coming up, and goldenrod. We have pussy toes and poison ivy in the upper right-hand corner. The poison ivy is a native species, as well as some wintergreen down in the moss, the lichens in the lower area. So This area is an inspiration to a lot of us in terms of what native plants would be in an undisturbed area. And the stewards of the Oswegatchie Hills Nature Preserve work hard to keep out invasive species, keep the trails groomed up, stop the erosion, all the things to keep this as the native ecosystem that it is intended to be, that it has been, and we hope will continue to be. And we hope to add the northern third back into the preserve. We would love to have you hiking. This is a 2019 picture, pre-COVID, so no masks and people standing a lot closer together than they would be right now. And there will be some hikes during Connecticut Trails Day in this June 5th. People need to sign up online for any Connecticut Woodland CT Trails Day event this year. They are requiring advanced registration from people. So I just had to give that plug for Oswegatchie Hills, and I do hope that when you're in southeastern Connecticut, you'll stop by and take a visit of it. But that brings us then to the other side of the equation, and that is Americans and our lawns. Not exactly a natural ecosystem. You hear the phrase monoculture, and that indeed is what our turf grass lawns have become. The idea, there are so many good programs and messages out there, particularly now, encouraging people to change our habits, to go back to supporting native wildlife and ecosystems. So we are almost into summer here. The point of this summer webinar session is it's time to sit back and reflect and think about your lawn this summer. We have to pay homage to our healthyyards.org friends down in Westchester County, reminding us that lawns are not necessarily natural. They're definitely not natural. Many times we aspire to have a lawn because we think it is a sign of stature or wealth, but maybe it's time to change our ways and make our lives a lot easier, and in the process make things better for the natural environment. This on the right hand side, this is my yard last year at this time. I'm not going to show you it this year at this time because we have a COVID puppy, and our COVID puppy, a 65-pound standard poodle, 1-year-old yesterday, has torn up big sections of our yard. So this fall, I'm going to be reseeding that yard. And some of the research that I've done for your talk is going to be helping me decide what to plant in my yard this summer. But our lawns look great now in Connecticut because it is early summer. It's not even technically summer yet. But it's going to change as the seasons go on, as it gets warmer this summer. And we'll take a look at those pictures in a minute. These are some of the different sources that I encourage you to check out and learn from as you decide what to do, how to rethink your lawn this summer and your yard. The Pollinator Pathway organization encourages people to shrink our lawn space, our monoculture turfgrass space, and by mowing less often, using less pesticides, and planting native species, we're supporting pollinators. Meanwhile, there's a Healthy Lawns, Healthy Rivers initiative. That's something in southeastern Connecticut in the Nyack River watershed, where nitrogen runoff from lawns, as well as septic systems that need to be upgraded, replaced, or pumped out on a regular basis. That campaign encourages people also to mow higher, let your grass get longer, limit your use of nitrogen, and water smart. That is, water less often and deeper. Very parallel messages and advice from these organizations. Meanwhile, you have Connecticut NOFA, who's been around for a number of years with the Organic Land Care Program standards and accredited organic land care professionals that a person could hire if they need help on their lawn. Again, they start with the first philosophy: do no harm to the lawn, to your yard, your environment. Plan on feeding the soil, and everything else is going to come, as long as you are increasing biodiversity and limiting, not using synthetic inputs. So this is the time to make some changes. I don't know if the past year being home and cooped up with COVID, many of us have gotten more in touch with nature, and we want to garden more. We want to try more things. The question is, how do we do it? Where do we go? And I want to give you some advice and ideas from a Connecticut garden writer and author, Thomas Christopher. splits his time now between Middletown and the Berkshires. He is, you might be familiar with him in past years. He's written for Martha Stewart magazine, the New York Times about 15, 20 years ago when they had a garden writer at that time, Architectural Digest. He, over the years, has really grasped the sustainable gardening message and has done a lot of work with lawns, trying to figure out alternatives to that traditional turfgrass lawn. So if you don't know Tom Christopher, check out his podcasts, Growing Greener. He interviews all the leading garden writers because he is one himself. And it is available on podcast as well as played out of the University Station in Middletown, Connecticut. He's a garden ranter. This is a fun website to go to and read different articles by professional garden writers. So this is the typical Connecticut lawn situation that we have. Our lawns look great now because we grow cool season grasses, which, by the way, Kentucky bluegrass is not from Kentucky. It's from Europe. And so are the fescues that we grow. And so is the perennial rye, which has nothing to do with rye bread. So that's that mixture of cool season grasses that we traditionally have bought and had spread on our yards. When it gets above 80 degrees for a few weeks in the summer, it goes dormant. It didn't die. It just turned brown because it's a cool season grass. It's going to come back in the fall. So this lawn that you're looking at is in midsummer, and that's a live but dormant cool season lawn because they have a sprinkler out there, but they're not irrigating on a regular basis. Most people tend to mow our grass too short. We think it needs to be like turf grass. So we, like a golf course. So we set our mower at 2 inches. That's way too short because what grows on the top predicates how deep the roots are going to go below. And if your grass is too short, crabgrass, this disgusting annual grass that we don't like, again, it's an invasive grass as well. It moves in and grows on top. It's a summer grass. It's green. It's what makes your lawn look green in the summer on top of the brown stuff. Then if you want to go to the expense of irrigating, assuming that you have the water and you're not on a well, Kentucky bluegrass usually needs 1 inch of water a week. Well, once it gets over 80 degrees, it needs 2 to 2.5 inches of rain, of moisture a week. And you know who likes moisture and water? Grubs in the soil and fungal diseases. So you could be paying a lot for water and you're making your lawn sicker in the process of doing that, because we all want to have that green lawn. If you fertilize your lawn, the 4-step program, 3 or 4 times a year, you have put nitrogen on in April, and the lawn is growing in April and May and thatching up, and you might have groundwater contamination. And if it runs into surface water, that leads to hypoxia, whereas an absence of nitrogen or of oxygen in the water. So it's a challenge to have the lawn that we want to have. So where do you start? And we're going to go over some different ideas and solutions to trying to change up your yard, keeping in the ideas of the pollinator pathway, as well as a healthy lawn series and what Connecticut NOFA recommends. First of all, get your soil analyzed. Do this every couple of years. You don't have to do it every year, but you have 2 choices in Connecticut. Connecticut Agricultural Experiment Station, I think, is still free for soil testing. You can go online, there's the link there, or you can pay, I think it's up to $12 now for a soil sample with the Yukon Soil Analysis Lab. But there's similar tests. They'll send you a translation, explain what that means, and it's going to tell you what your soil pH is. That's the relative acidity of it or alkalinity of it. 7 is immediately neutral. And we kind of want to be in that 6 to 7-ish range here in Connecticut, maybe up to 7.5. But the point is this: depending on the pH factor or the acidity of your soil, that determines how the nutrients are released, the micronutrients. Some are bound up in an acid soil, some are bound up in an alkaline soil. And if you're not right in the sweet spot, your grass is not getting the micronutrients that it needs. They'll also tell you if you really need nitrogen, which makes the grass grow, phosphorus, which you probably don't need, and potassium. You might need phosphorus if you're starting a new lawn. So get your soil test. That's something you can do over the summer, because the best time to seed grass in Connecticut, whether you're dealing with a dog like I am, or a lawn with some patches in it, or you've decided you want to switch out to some different kinds of grasses, is the fall here in Connecticut. There was a spring window, but late August is a good time to plan to seed your lawn. So kick back and relax this summer, go to the beach. If you're watering your lawn intermittently, you're just watering the weeds and the grubs. Some different kind of grasses to look for and think about. And I don't want people to be intimidated by all this grass mixture talk. I know I regularly can be, and I studied horticulture in college. Fine fescues are grasses that tend to grow in the shade, and they've got skinny leaves, skinny blades. They are best for low traffic areas, not a soccer game, not kids or dogs tearing up a lot. You're going to see new names to us of fine fescues in your grass seed mix, like chewings fescue, creeping red fescue, hard fescue, or sheep fescue. And Tom Christopher here a few years back did an experiment with sheep fescue. It's a festuca is the Latin name for it, but it is a lovely grass that grows well in more of a shaded area, not direct sun. So if you have trees over your yard in Connecticut, get some fine fescue mixes and scatter them over, overseed them over your current lawn if you've got some patches and holes in it. For tougher traffic, you want tall or coarse fescues. And these are used in golf courses and playing fields. You can read up on professional turf mixes and see what they do put in playing fields. The good thing about fine fescues and tall and coarse fescues is that they are more salt tolerant. So road salt, street salt, if you have that problem, you need to seed that grass closer to the edge of the lawn. And these grasses get by on a half of the amount of nitrogen that Kentucky bluegrass normally would have, or that Kentucky bluegrass perennial ryegrass mixture that you would plant. The other thing is that I'm really glad to see it catching on is the idea that it's okay to have clover with little white flowers in it in your yard. It's not only okay, it's beneficial. Clover is a legume. That means it's a nitrogen fixer. It sucks nitrogen out of the air, holds it in the plant roots. It decomposes over the winter, in the off seasons. It's just fed your lawn. So what Tom Christopher recommends is get a mix of 3 different fescues, coarse or tall, depending on your sunny or dry location. Throw in a little bit, only up to 5% of white clover, and seed that in the fall. And overseeding it, where you go, you rough up the ground and you sprinkle in the seed, you tamp it back in a little bit. Hopefully we're going to get fall rain and moisture, and the grass should get going by itself. A good source to check with is the Charles Hart Seed Company in Wethersfield. They work with big firms, but they will put blends together for other people. And if you go to their website, Tom recommends them. They have these mixes already. Coastal lawn, which means some more salt. It'll take salt tolerance. Slow growing, as well as the water saver ones. And they have shade and sun. So don't be intimidated by that discussion about your grass mix. So what if you want to do something a little different and say, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet and get rid of some of my lawn, but I still want grasses. I'm not a flower person, okay? I'm not really a gardener. Well, there are so many native grasses that we can use for different ways around our yards. There are sedges, which technically aren't grasses, but they have singular stems like grasses. For example, prairie dropseed, bunny blue sedge, and here's some big blue stem. A lot of these came from the prairies of North America. They will adapt to here. They'll be okay here. Others are partially from this region. And this will give you more of a clumpy look and effect with your grasses. Some of these can be mowed, but you either have grasses that spread out or you have grasses that clump. And we don't have to have a totally flat yard all the time with the grasses, especially if we're in an area where you don't play soccer in the far end of the field, yard. You just want it to look green and good. And I have to give credit to Emily Green, Save the Sound, who you just saw. She gave me both of these pictures, and these are her yard. She is planting different big stem big blue stem, little blue stem, different sedges. Sedges tend to do better in shade, whereas some of your other native grasses, you definitely can find ones that will grow in sun. Also, I commend Emily for wood chipping instead of mulching. Wood chips are going to last longer. Deer ticks don't like wood chips as well as they like mulch. And you see no pachysandra here. Deer ticks seem to like to hang out in pachysandra. I'm not sure if it's because of the pachysandra is below barberry, where the field mice and moles and voles, not moles, excuse me. I like moles. Voles need to keep their distance from my house. But deer ticks end up on those little animals. They end up on the plants, and the voles happen to like barberry because it protects them from predators. It's also an invasive plant. You don't want barberry. So here's some example of native ornamental grasses. These are called warm season grasses, even though they're perennials. They last year round, but they grow and thrive and put out the seed in the summertime, while the cool turf grasses are going dormant and brown. Indian grass, or I love this one, purple love grass, which the seeds come out reddish, pinkish purple. And so they're quite attractive then in the fall. Or little blue stem, which actually gets pretty big. Tall blue stem is even a lot taller than that. So those are examples of ornamental grasses that are native that you can find. Prairie Moon Nursery is in, I think, Minnesota or Wisconsin, but you can shop around and look for different seed companies that do produce seed in different regions, parts of the country. This graphic shows us why it's so important to get a mixture other than just turf grass in our lawns. Look at over here, way on the left-hand side. Turf grass is mowed 2 or 3 inches or 4 inches tall. Well, the roots only go about that deep below. Look how deep these roots go of all of these different native plants here. When roots go down that deep, they are carrying moisture down in. They're carrying some nutrients down in. More of the nutrients stay up in the top of the soil, but they're making for a healthier soil profile. There will be the necessary insects in the soil, and you do want insects in your soil. You don't want invasive jumping worms, but you do want, it's okay to have creepy crawly things in your yard, in the grass. That's okay. So keep this in mind when you're wondering why your lawn might go dry in the summer. It just doesn't have the roots that these other plants do. So I hope those are some helpful ideas, how-tos. Okay, what do I do? Go look for some of the different grasses, different grass mixes. Try and look and ask for ornamental native grasses. But let's back up and look at the bigger cosmic situation here. Our infatuation with the American lawn means that our biggest agricultural crop in this country is lawn. It's bigger than the state of Texas. And that actually emits carbon dioxide. We contributing to global warming. We use a significant amount of water just to keep our lawns green. And in the case of Connecticut, to feed the fungus and support the grubs as well as the grass. And that water could be put to better uses or just not used, could be kept in as groundwater, kept in the soil profile. New York Audubon estimates that 7 million wild birds are killed yearly by different lawn pesticides. And those are things like grub control that definitely have an impact on non-target species. Plus, the mere production of a synthetic fertilizer, it is a fossil fuel product, is contributing to greenhouse gases. And lawnmowers, besides being noisy, don't have pollution controls on them and are coughing out a lot of fumes. And so are weed whackers and leaf blowers, all those noisy kind of things that we have in our yard. So that's why the yard isn't always so pleasant. So the idea is, how do we make some of these changes and transitions? How do we give up that lawn or not give it up, just make it easier to care for? Here's some good specific tips from the Healthy Lawns, Healthy Rivers initiative that I mentioned. It's funded by the Long Island Sound Study. This infographic was sent out in southeastern Connecticut about a month or so ago, reminding people don't over fertilize, get your soil tested before you fertilize, and avoid pesticides. Again, that's a very similar message to pollinator pathway. They all care about the same thing, keeping a healthy ecosystem for us, and certainly to consider the alternatives to a lawn. The one thing, watering, you don't want to have a sprinkler you turn on, 1 inch of water a week does not mean a 1/4 inch of water every day for 4 days. All that's going to do is stimulate root growth right at the edge of the soil. You need a soaking 1 inch of water going in. Maybe you augment and add water if we don't get a weekly rainfall, or maybe you just let your cool season grass go dormant over the summer anyway. If you live under trees in your yard, it's going to be shaded and it may not go dormant, but a full sun lawn definitely will. Great resources on pollinator pathways. Every time I go there, there are new things and links to other places. So lots of good information there if you want to try to do some different things. I encourage you to go look at the organic land care section of the CT NOFA website. And there is an online directory of professionals who have been trained in organic land care methods. There's a difference between applying synthetic fertilizers and natural fertilizers. Natural fertilizers are things like a bone meal or a chicken meal, corn gluten, which is actually used as an herbicide suppressant, a natural suppressant. You put it on early, it blocks the sunlight for germinating things, but it breaks down later into nitrogen. But you need to understand how these break down. Just because something is natural doesn't mean you cannot misuse it and make mistakes too. But natural products generally break down much more slowly than fossil fuel products. And they also have not added to global warming in the process of being created. And go look at the Yukon Home and Garden Education Center website. There are oodles of good fact sheets. They've been carrying information about how to take care of a Connecticut lawn for years. So if you want to go see what Pam Cooper has to say, she is one of their lawn care experts and also bug expert. Here in the lower Connecticut River Valley region where I live, the Connecticut River Coastal Conservation District puts out a great invasive plants in your backyard guide. I don't mean to sound so excited about it, but they just updated the 2020 edition with 4 more invasive plants. But they have identified the most frustrating, disgusting ones that are hitting us hard here. And that includes good old bittersweet, burning bush, and garlic mustard, as well as my nemesis, Japanese knotweed. Now, Martin, I want to check and see, have we had any questions coming in from people about lawns or anything at this point before I go into talking about Nix the Knotweed or Nix the Knotweed?
We haven't had any specific questions, but there was one comment about from Regina O'Brien about one of her clients is concerned about her children getting stung by bees if we add a lot of clover to the lawn.
So, European honeybees are colony bees. I don't think that they tend to go toward white clover as much as other bees, but a lot of our bees are solitary bees, which means they live alone, which means they don't have the herding instinct because they're not trying to protect a queen bee. They're passive bees. They're not attracted to people. They don't want to sting people. That's not their makeup and their nature. The other thing is you actually might get, there's things that are called sweat bees, but they're actually little stinging flies, I think. You might run into those, but not necessarily on white clover. But the idea that you're going to have hordes of bees coming in from something like clover and grass, I've not seen that. And the other thing is we haven't seen the cicadas coming out yet. We're waiting for them to hatch. I don't want people to get freaked out when is it 17-year cicadas that we're going to be seeing this year? Is that the cycle that we're dealing with?
Yeah, and they're late this year because we did have a cold spring. So they're just starting to come out in Pennsylvania right now. So I imagine, as the days get warmer, the ground needs to be 66 degrees for a few days in a row for them to emerge from their dormant state. And for the ground to warm up to that, the air temperature needs to be, at least 70s or 80s for a week or so. So we're getting there, but yeah, they're arriving a little late this year.
Right. So if you're concerned about stinging insects, and I certainly respect that, do a little Googling of the different pictures of cicadas or wasps or things and realize when the cicadas come out, they can make a lot of buzzing racket. I mean, I lived in Northern Virginia. That one year when they came out, I was like, oh my God, the traffic noise has gotten horrible. it's tires ringing on the highway or something. Is that what it is? And it was actually the cicadas popping out and in the trees. And it was a very noisy long weekend. It was fascinating. But then the sound went away. They were gone again for another 17 years. But
yeah, we just got another comment from someone who visited their family in DC, and they're all over the place down there. So yeah, it's coming north. It's as it's getting warmer and warmer. Our time will be soon. So everyone get ready.
Yeah, I grew up in Kansas, and the June bugs or June beetles, which are really a large grub, that was always, they came out in June, and you'd have the outdoor light on and the screen door closed, and they'd be bumping into the screen all the time. But it's a childhood memory that I have. We coexisted together. So, well, I want to move on to invasive, being that I mentioned the Connecticut River Coastal Conservation District and their wonderful handbook that they put about controlling invasive species. One of the challenging, and I encourage you, if you're in other conservation districts, go check and see what information they have for your region, or if you're in another state, similar organizations. But this guide, you can download it and print it out. And the nice thing is that it also includes native alternatives that you could plant. But it includes mechanical control methods and efforts to try to eradicate or beat back, control these invasive plants. It also includes some information on chemical options as a final alternative. But I want to talk today about one plant that has really caught my eye and attention. It's Japanese knotweed, and you might have noticed it too. I moved to Connecticut in 2002, and I've been a busy working person, corporate lifestyle, and then a mother at home with kids. And as I'm driving up and down the shore road, I kept noticing these plants shooting up every year with these giant heart-shaped leaves. And I'm like, what are these? And I've came to understand that this is Japanese knotweed. It is an Asian plant that was brought here in the mid-1800s as a pretty ornamental. It gets really big, up to 12 feet tall. It has flowers in August. It has these fascinating bamboo-like stems, but it is now, it just loves it here. It fits in our climate. And I think that as it's getting warmer, and if we have these moist springs like we have with the heavier rains in the spring and the fall, this stuff is just very happy. Its native climate would be riverbanks in Japan. And we're at about the same latitude right across. It's also a problem in Europe and in England, as you'll see. And by the way, we send a lot of plants from North America. They've been taken to other continents as well, where they become invasive plants over in that other continent. The reason a plant becomes invasive is it's not from a particular continent. Therefore, there's not the native ecosystem around it, and it doesn't have natural predators that control it. One of the reasons we like Japanese knotweed is the deer won't eat it. And no insects seem to eat it. Matter of fact, the only insects that seem to eat it are Japanese beetles, which is frightening in and of itself, because I don't want Japanese beetles in my garden either. But you'll see it growing around here this summer. And I noticed in past years, I kept saying, oh my God, what do I do about this stuff? I don't want to spray chemicals on it, but I want to try to control it. I thought bittersweet was the kudzu of the North, and I decided that Japanese knotweed is the kudzu of the North instead. So the plant is happily growing on our roadsides. It has been here over 100 and some years. It is in all of these states where you see blue on our USDA plant database map. And the problem with invasive species like this, if they crowd out the native plants, then those don't support the native insects that feed the migrating birds that are coming through, or the native birds that are here. And again, plants taken around to other areas, the majority of plants and the majority of insects and other species can colonize on another part of the world and not cause a problem. Or you may have, there's oaks all over the world. Some came from some continents, some came from others. There's apple trees that originated from Europe, but from Asia. They're over here as well. But probably about 10% of them tend to just be prolific. They can produce multiple ways. Matter of fact, these are considered to be the top 10 invasive plant species of concern in the state of Connecticut, taken on a poll by our CIPWIG, Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group. We have, I think, 97 or 98 plants that have been declared invasive in the state of Connecticut for that very reason, that they propagate by seeds, roots, rhizomes, vegetative cuttings. And there's just not native predators. There's not insects, there's not fungal pathogens that are going to keep them at bay, or wildlife that want to eat them. So Japanese knotweed for about 4 years now has topped the list, right up there with Oriental bittersweet and barberry and multiflora rose, which seems to have been around forever, as well as mugwort, which is growing in concern. This interesting chart put together shows different times of the year how you can try different controls of these different invasive plants. And you'll notice that the knotweed has perhaps a shorter window than some of the other plants to control. And you'll notice that it has mechanical cutting showing up as a recommendation in late May, early June, late July into August, and maybe into September, October. This is a compilation of information put together by different plant people, but we'll give you the link for that. And if you are interested in trying to figure out different ways to combat invasive plants, this calendar can help you figure that out. So what about the Japanese knotweed? It is a real problem in Europe and England, especially, where, again, the climate is just perfect and ideal for it, because the stems, if you cut them into little pieces, something as small as a ½ an inch can put out roots and sprout and grow into a whole new plant. So it's kind of like plutonium. It kind of scares you from a standpoint. If you have cuttings of this floating around, or they get in the water and they go downstream and land on somebody else's bank, they'll start growing. So it's hard in England to get a mortgage on a piece of property if you have Japanese knotweed growing on it. So here in the US, it is invasive, declared invasive in a number of states, but I've not heard of any provision that requires or mandates people to try to remove it before they do something with their property. I mean, the same could be said for a lot of other invasive species as well. So the method that we're following is trying to eradicate, cut back, or control the Japanese knotweed is a method that P.D. Reed and Abby Stokes developed in the Pine Grove community in the village of Niantic in East Lyme, Connecticut. It's called a carbohydrate deprivation method. You cut the plants back 3 times a summer for 3 years, and you will see a marked reduction in the plants. And I'll explain some of the processes of what's going on and why. And you'll see native plants returning. So last year, trapped at home by COVID, I launched a communications campaign called Nix the Knotweed, where I followed those steps, and we're using social media to let people know when is it time to chop your knotweed, what to do with these cuttings, because they have to be managed and handled. And so that's what we're doing this summer. And I'm encouraging people to sign up on the Facebook page, and I'll remind you when is the cutting window and what to do with this stuff. I'd love to see your pictures of it.
Hey, Suzanne, a quick
Yes.
question. Someone's asking if goats will eat knotweed.
Oh, well, that's a good discussion question. Somebody says they can. Somebody else in Pennsylvania emailed me and told me, well, my goats bloated when we fed them knotweed. So check with the veterinarian before you feed knotweed to your goats. I've seen articles from people saying that, yes, goats will eat it. But I've been in email contact with people who said, please be careful how much knotweed you feed your goat. we are looking in Lyme, Connecticut for some goats to eat some knotweed. So,
And we have another quick question. What do you do with the knotweed once you've cut it?
well, that's what we're going to talk about right now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, these are all the volunteers that have been mixing, chopping knotweed at different sites around in southeastern Connecticut. So here's the success story of Pine Grove. This was 10 years ago where they started this method. They said, kind of like planting with the moon, let's pay attention to what's going on with the growth cycles of this plant. If you chop it down 3 times, I'll tell you what those time windows are. They're windows, they're not moon signs. But if you go in and cut it down repeatedly, over time, you're going to see a native seed bank come back, or you can help support it by adding native plants back in. So they made it really simple. 3 tools, 3 times for 3 years. Something as simple as a hand cutter or a long-handled lopper. Definitely wear gloves. They started by bagging the live clippings. And that can be done in Connecticut with invasive plant materials because our municipal trash is incinerated. Now, we also need to minimize our overall trash. We don't want to be going to landfills. We're moving away from incineration, particularly the Mira plant in Connecticut. So we're looking at some other methods of killing off the live cuttings so you can dispose of them different ways. The best time windows are right now, late May into early June, then cut mid-July and get the last cutting done by August 20th. That's when they're blooming and the nutrients are beginning to, the days are, starting to get shorter. The nutrients are going back into the root ball for the next year. This is where the carbohydrates are up top. The plant grows, you cut off the carbohydrates. The plant grows, you cut them off again. Think like you're a deer, and it's a favorite plant. And by the time you've eaten that plant 3 times over the summer, you've significantly stunted it, especially if it's my favorite plant in the yard. So that's the idea. That's the timing window. What you don't want to do is a weed whacker or mowing it creates those 1/2-inch pieces. And everywhere that there's an axil on a stem, a new plant can grow out of that little axil on that bamboo-y like stem. If you try to dig it out, the roots easily go 20 feet deep, and it's better just not to disturb them. A lot of weeds they recommend just cut them off, get rid of the growth on the top, especially if they're a seeding plant. Cut mustard garlic and bag the seeds before they go to seed, which is right now. The other problem is pesticides may or may not work. It seems to take the same amount of time using a popular pesticide like glyphosate as it does to do the cutting method. And if you're on a waterway, which this stuff tends to grow on riverbanks and waterways, you may not want to be using chemical pesticides there anyway, or you may need a special permit. So this is the first year in Pine Grove where it was growing on a hillside overlooking the Niantic River. They started small, 100 by 20 feet. Knowing that it was spreading everywhere else, they said, we're just going to focus on this one little spot. You see the bank here, that anything would be running off down into the Niantic River. So cutting it 3 times for 3 years, this is what it looked like in the 3rd year. Now, this is a native natural setting. This isn't an ornamental landscaped flower bed. So we're not going for ornamental landscaped flower bed here. We're going for a native setting to see what comes back. You see Virginia creeper. They saw pitch pines come in because that's a native plant there. They saw wood asters. Jewelweed is a common transitory weed, native plant that will come up. It's got cool little orange flowers. They also saw some barberry. They saw some multiflora rose. They saw some native grasses. So you have, and this looks like right in the middle there, that looks like bittersweet. So just because you're removing the Japanese knotweed, you also have to control and watch out for the other invasive woody species that can be popping in as well. But they were surprised to see the robustness of the actual native plants that came back. And the trick, if you're on a hillside, you seed some rudbeckia and stuff that you want at the top, and the seeds are going to drift down over a couple of years. So this is a combination of, I think, some reseeding, but also just seeing what came back in as native plants. The beauty of doing this is you've not put down a contact herbicide like glyphosate that kills everything that it touches. You're not putting down a residual herbicide that lasts for 3 to 6 months. and catches different plants as they come up, you're selectively going in and removing the plants that you don't want. So it does take time, but if you're an active gardener anyway, then instead of going crazy and spraying it once a year and worrying if it's going to come back or not, what if you just set aside cutting times each time? Now, what to do with the cuttings? So we took this method and I said, fine, I'm stuck at home. My kids are stuck at home. Nobody can go to summer camp. I went out of the house. We're going to organize nixing parties, snipping parties, and us gardeners could get together and still, stand 6 feet apart and bring our masks. We ended up with, this is a whole family here helping us. This is behind Old Lyme Town Hall. Here's the grove of knotweed. And we got started on this one in mid-June. And unfortunately, there's Phragmites in the marsh behind it, but that's a different issue. But what we did here on the riverbank, it's messy the first time you cut it down because you've got last year's dead stems. What happens with knotweed, it gets killed in the first hard frost. And those bamboo-y stems, which are lightweight and you can't really do anything with, they're sticking up, they're in the way. So you want to cut those out and pull those out at the same time. So we generated a pile of dead plant materials and we generated a pile of live plant materials. So the first cutting was the most labor intensive, but it was a group activity. It was fun. So, and we felt like we were doing a good deed, a good cause. We put it on tarps to make sure pieces weren't getting away from us. This is what it looked like a couple of weeks after that first cutting. We gave up. We ran out of steam. We didn't go on for the stuff on the left-hand side of the bank, but all of this right-hand side of the riverbank had been covered with the knotweed. And here you see a Norway maple seedling because that's a Norway maple tree. That's invasive too, but it is a shade tree. So you had the stubble left over. Here it was after a second cutting in the summer. And we're beginning to see Virginia creeper and other things come back in, but we also are beginning to see this riverbank. It was dry at that time of the summer. Here it was this past April. I went back to check on it and we had like a nice little cleaned up area. You could actually see the stonework again. But on April 21st, we also started to see the sprouts of the knotweed coming back. So these were much suppressed plants. Over on the side here, the skunk cabbage was coming up. Looks to be a spice bush or a cornice of some kind that was in a little side yard. So we're year one into the fight here. We learned some things in the process. It was like, okay, you got to use long-handled loppers when you're cutting the deep stuff and wear waders if you're going to be in the water. Some of the guys said, this is ridiculous. I have a sharp power tool I used. And we realized, yeah, if you get one of those mechanical brush cutters with the circular blade, not the filament that's going to send fragments everywhere, you can get a clean cut on the base of this disgustingly thick stem that may be the size of your wrist by mid-June, and just do a simple cut at the bottom. Wear your protective gear. We protect your ears and your eyes. We got tired of the plastic bags going, well, we seem to be putting a lot of plastic bags in the trash. So we tried solarizing the cuttings, laying them on a tarp. This happened to be on top of a gravel driveway, putting another tarp over it, weighting it down with the bags. And in the hot summer sun, it died in a couple of weeks. But that does take a little bit of space to do that. But that works for like land trusts and other groups in areas where you really have a big amount of it. Once this stuff is dead, depending on what the rules are in your town, you could burn it. You could compost it again at home. I would not take it to the town leaf pile just in case there's some live piece. And I would not take it to the wood chip pile because it's worthless as a wood chip. So the Lyme Art Association had this similar problem. Here they had mowed the ground last May when I did a spring mowing and left all of the long stems. Well, at every axle, a little plant popped up. So here we are in June looking at it. We organized crews of people, again, going stir crazy over the summer because we couldn't go on vacation anywhere. So we would go and spend a couple evenings a week chopping the knotweed back. And you see some of the grasses and different things that started popping up while we were doing this. You will get frustrated because this plant, it will keep growing back. but you are frustrating it just like it's frustrating you. So you keep cutting it back. Here's the solarizing where we had some bags on top of some plants. This is before we did our third and final cutting behind it. So it grew back up, but there's a lot of grasses and other things here. On the left-hand side, in this picture in the lower right-hand corner, is a hillside that we started on 1/3 and ran out of steam. Said, we're not going to burn ourselves out. We're going to have a before and after. So we're coming back this summer and we'll be cutting it again. We have a cutting party tonight, as a matter of fact. This is some of the stuff that came back. This is a September walk. We have lobelia, that's the red flower. We have Joe Pye weed. We have the jewel weed. We have cattails. And this is going right down into a little stream or riverbank. So it was really exciting to see the plants that were there. They just needed to get some sunshine. And there are some grasses and some foxtails. Again, you might call these weed species. They're kind of transitory. They may be moving through, but you do this for a couple of years and you start to add in the plants that you want and let them get established. So this is the hillside we gave up on. We did a half of it. And there's probably a tree of heaven right there that we had to take out too. We're coming back for the other side this year. And we're going to do more of the solarizing on the ground. So we launched the campaign a couple of weeks ago. And I'm happy to say that we have the Friends of Whalebone Cove got permission from the Silvio Oconte Preserve, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're tackling a big clump of this at the opening of the Whalebone, the land side of the Whalebone Cove. Their Friends of Whalebone Cove go out and do hydrilla pulls and trappa, water chestnut pulls on the water during the summer as well. So we're giving them a little turf before their surf, I guess, in terms of invasive plant management. Also, lime land.
Sorry, excuse me, Suzanne. So it's 1 o'clock. I just want to let people know that, yes, obviously we are running a little bit late, but we'll keep running for those that want to stay on. So just wanted to let everybody know that we have reached our time, but we are going to go a little long.
Great. I have about 3 more.
And we will stay on for questions at the end for those who have more questions.
Great. I get a little enthused about this topic. I have about 3 more slides to show. So Lime Land Trust is also doing the same with the before and the after. And over here on the Lieutenant River, the Roger Torrey Peterson Estuary Center is just working on a new educational center to be opened in coming years. And we know that we have an invasive plant problem, both with knotweed and with Phragmites. It's exciting the cutting that we did 2 weeks ago on the Lieutenant River. We found a trillium that was it needed sun. We found skunk cabbage that also needed sun, and elderberry, as well as arrowhead and jewelweed and cattails, signs of cattails, as well as there was Phragmites there. We're not addressing that right now, but the frag is moving up to a certain point, and then the knotweed is further up the ridge line from there. But we're starting this process there, and we're going to document it and see how it goes. So for the coming year, we're encouraging other people to try this method with us. We're open to experimentation of what are some ways that we can quantify what's coming back. It's also easier to handle than some other woody invasive species. It doesn't have prickers, and there's no allergic reaction. This is a food crop and can be eaten at the right time of the year. If you go to the Nix the Knotweed Facebook page and sign up, like and follow it, we'll put out timely reminders of now's the time to do the first, second, or third cutting. But again, this is a collaborative effort. We really welcome other people's input and participation about, well, this is what worked for me, this is what didn't work for me, and we're open to questions and collaborating together. There's a 2-page brochure that Emily's going to send out the link to you. It's just been posted on the Town of Old Lyme website, the town page of the Conservation Commission, but it has the same basic information. Oops. Let me end on that slide and say that I would be happy to hear any questions or comments.
So one of the good questions that came in is, do you have any recommendations on how to get permission to cut knotweed along roadsides?
So we got into this a bit with the towns. It's a matter of, if you're doing this, it's much like picking up trash along a roadside. you can go do that. The other thing is, if you're staying far enough away from the road for your own protection, it's a matter of, you can check with your municipality and say, is it okay that I'm going to be doing this? But like if it's on your property on the other side of that road or on someone else's property, if you can be doing them a favor on it. But, if people go out and choose to pick up trash along a roadside as well, that's something they're doing as a good deed. But you have to be careful with what you're doing. This is why we decided to focus on, like this at the Lyme Art Association. We clearly got their permission. It was their land. It was below the road. You could see where it was spreading. And so they welcomed us to do it.
Right. So another question about the knotweed was, can you, instead of using plastic bags, can you put it in paper bags?
So the problem with paper bags is you're not depleting the moisture out of them, or you're not cooking it, solarizing it enough. And what we're doing now is we're taking the plastic bag, like a bag is going to weigh 20 to 30 pounds, a contractor bag, by the time you stuff it full, tie it, close it up, set it out of the way in the sun somewhere, and see how long it takes for it to cook down and dry down. I did that some last summer, and it will dry out, but you have to wait a little while. But then once the clippings are dead out of that, you can remove them out of the bag, make sure that they indeed are dead, and reuse that bag for another round. We want to see if you can get in this cycle of 3 cuttings each about 3 weeks to 4 weeks apart, and you can recycle that plastic as you're doing that. But
also to do with the bags, actually a comment that I missed earlier was a question of whether or not you can, bag the plant with a plastic bag, and whether that would kill it, whether you could solarize it that way while it's still in the ground.
Yeah, we haven't tried that. The idea was, instead of tying plastic bags and leaving it there, that kind of defeats the purpose of letting the sunlight in for the other plants. You're truly trying to open up the space so the seed bed can reawaken if it is there, or if you can toss down some other seed. So,
gotcha. One thing that you touched on briefly, this isn't a question, but something that I'm adding in there, is we talked briefly about fertilizers and herbicides and things like that. And I would also like to introduce the concept. You guys, I'm Martin Hain from Save the Sound, and you may know me from the Healthy Yards emails. So that's where I'm sort of fit into this group. But I just sent out an email over the weekend about introducing natural insects as well. You can order ladybugs to put into your garden. Japanese praying mantis are actually good too, although they are also an invasive species and sometimes can get out of control. But if you have any other suggestions like that, Suzanne, that would be great.
Sure. Oh, I have to tell a funny aside. It's been fascinating trying to put this information out and say, this is something that's worked here for us in this part of the world, the country. We want to hear your suggestions and ideas. And some people have said, you should just be eating this stuff and embracing it anyway. Well, I would not encourage anybody to forage on any roadside or anywhere for a food crop, because the last thing you want is be eating roadside pollution from that standpoint. And there's just way too much knotweed. We'd all have to eat a heck of a lot of knotweed. And my experience with it has been, it's only edible very early on. That once it grows up into big, thick stems, I did a rather comical video last September trying to infuse vodka with it. It was kind of more of a joke. We did a YouTube channel too, because it was just, this is my COVID craziness. It was like, how can we get together? How can we socialize? How can we do something positive? And so if you can't cook with knotweed easily in August through September. It's past its prime. Or we're all going to get very pudgy from all the rhubarb, knotweed, strawberry buckle that I'm finding a lot of recipes that use sugar with it, I don't need that. I don't know about you.
So last call for questions. Please submit them through the chat, and we'll get them out to Suzanne.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions. Okay. Well, I'm not going to add my slides because we're over time, but thank you everybody for joining us today. Our next Healthy Yards webinar is in September, and you can find that on our Stay Engaged page, as well as other events that we have well between now and September as well. It's only May still. And also we will be sharing this recording with everybody once it's ready to go. And I will include all of these links that may have been in the chat box and you didn't get a chance to click on. There's also some additional ones that I didn't post in there. So be on the lookout for that.
Thanks, everybody.